I feel like sometimes, honestly, Spotify doesn't even understand its own normalization, and what it's doing.
What's good, everybody? Welcome back to Love Music More. I'm so excited to introduce you to Sam Moses, mastering engineer. He has got gold records. He's a Dove Award winner. He has multiple Grammy Award nominations, been on a bunch of TV shows. He's got #1 Billboard charts, #1 spots on iTunes, voting member of Grammy Academy. He is legit, to say the least. Billions and billions of streams. So what we talked about was a real deep dive into what does it actually look like to be making music here in 2025 on the dominant streaming platform, Spotify. What's it like to be mastering for Spotify or with Spotify in mind? And how do you balance all of the different things like normalization, where if you don't know this, you can go onto your Spotify app, and most people, if you're listening to this on Spotify, it's on. Like, vast majority of people have this on. And I was always kind of like, I always turn it off because I think that I'm trying to give the artists their fair share by listening to it unnormalized. So things go up and down a little bit. It's not a smooth volume from song to song like it would be on the radio. Sam had a really good take on that normalization, and he was talking about leaving it on. And so it was a great conversation about what is actually going on inside of these algorithms. Why do some songs sound way louder than others? And what does it actually look like to make a finished record in the modern climate? Great conversation. So excited for you to hear it. Before we do, I'd like to introduce our title sponsor, DistroKid. DistroKid makes music distribution fun and easy with unlimited uploads, and artists get to keep 100% of royalties and earnings. I use DistroKid, and you can too, with a 30% off discount courtesy of DistroKid. Go to distrokid.com/VIP/lovemusicmore to get started for 30% off and keep 100% of your royalties and earnings. 1 million plus artists rely on DistroKid to get their music onto Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, TikTok, Tidal, Instagram, all the major streaming services. One of my favorite things about it is that you're able to go in there and do all of your splits. So I don't have to do the accounting if I'm working with somebody, if I'm recouping money, as in like they gave me a little bit of money to promote it or something like that. No problem. They can get their first $200. DistroKid handles all of that for you. Get started today at distrokid.com/VIP/lovemusicmore, all one word, for 30% off. Enjoy this conversation with Sam. Love music more. Love music more. Music more. Music more. Music more. What's good, everybody? Welcome back to Love Music More. I am Scoobert Dubert and joined with Sam Moses from Moses Mastering. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to talk about mastering and talk about your take on finishing records, putting that final polish on, and just kind of the ways that it looks song to song. Because I'm sure that you get things that are super smashed, super quiet, everything in between. What's it look like just in terms of that initial workflow when you have a song hit your inbox?
Well, at this stage, this will just be my opinion and observation of the last 14 years. And then specifically once COVID hit, labels too, and kind of everybody moved to this very much single release and then social media kind of testing of ideas. So TikTok, Instagram has become huge for artists and labels to, tease a song. We're working on this song, blah, blah, blah. And then if it gets traction, they'll end up cutting it, or sometimes, spoiled magic, it's already done. And they're just building buzz, which is smart because marketing is a lot of this industry. But yeah, so most of the time I say that because most people are releasing singles, and then I know at some point they're going to wrap that into an EP most likely. Then I know at some point they're going to wrap that into a record at some point. And then I know at some point they'll probably do a deluxe record.
Yes.
So there's kind of this cycle, I'm in the process of the deluxe of a few different records right now, that they started releasing this record a year and a half ago. Cycle of their plan was, single marketing, okay, now EP, now we tour that, okay, momentum, single, okay, here comes the record, okay, now we've got momentum, features on the deluxe, okay, here's the deluxe. I say all that too because my main focus, whether I get now at this stage a single or a record, is to know that I need to make every song reach its full potential from day one. And then also I need to keep in mind that these will probably all end up on the same record. And also end up being from different mixers, producers, et cetera, et cetera. So I have to keep in mind that sometimes I know that every song can't reach the same end potential as maybe the few sonically better songs. If you've mastered, worked in audio, you'll probably learn you can push certain songs. And when I say push, it's like compression or overall loudness. If it's really well put together, sourced, mixed, then it doesn't distort, it doesn't kind of fall apart when I push it a bit more or give it some saturation. So when I get a song, it's always in the context of this will probably end up next to 10 to 15 other songs. And so I have to keep that in mind. I always have tons of notes in my sessions, of what I did and kind of where we landed for
Cool.
loudness and compression, dynamic range, and true.
What does that look like? Are you putting those notes like within the note
It's
section
all
of
in
Tools tracks
Logic.
and
I have a unique workflow. So I started in a band and then that moved into like the post production, into producing, mixing, and mastering kind of accidentally happened. This was 15, 16 years ago. And my workflow for mastering became very much how I approached like mixing, which is to me very creative, bussing, aux, parallels, effects. And when I got to mastering and when we started sending stuff off when I was just producing or mixing, it just felt like there was such a disconnect in the creativity to me of
Mm.
like every other process stage of making a song felt creative, collaborative, communal. When it got to mastering, it just felt transactional. It was kind of how a lot of people feel like it's a mystery or like it's, a fairy dust or it's whatever. And I really just think that equals it's misunderstood. And it's misunderstood because, in my opinion, the word mastering has been hijacked, which is kind of an extreme word, but hijacked and watered down to two bus processing.
Mm.
So when we watered it down to that, and more so when plugin companies started saying this is mastering, meaning a limiter equals mastering, that really got us going down kind of the confusing route of what a great mastering engineer can offer, which to me is bringing peace of mind, being able to listen to a mix, having consumed so many records that are finished, records that are out. If you've studied those records, and I think if you've done due diligence, which I've learned over my career, a lot of mastering engineers kind of stumble into it and then they kind of just like have massive imposter syndrome their whole career of like, they don't really know why it's better. They don't know how to call something done. They don't have a process. They just kind of go with their gut. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And for me, I was just like, my brain likes to have systems. So I looked at other industries and thought, well, other industries have ways to call something done. And I've talked about either making a pizza before, depending on the type of pizza you want to make, there's a recipe and context. If you want to make Neapolitan, it's double O flour usually. It's X amount of, days to rise. It's a special water. It's a special temperature. If you follow that, you will indeed get the Neapolitan pizza. If you want deep dish, it's usually, organic bread flour. It's a different method, different tomatoes. That'll get you that style. And so with art, I think for a long time, people have always done like, well, how do you actually know something's done? How do I know when my song's done? And really, I simplified it to, well, if you're wanting to compete in the commercial market, then we know the end product goal. Like the end goal is to compete in the commercial market. They want to make money. They want to make a living off of it. Okay, so you got to play the game, and the game is the commercial market, usually. You can accept that that's what it is, or you can try to do it another route. The other route usually isn't profitable for people. And that's not good or bad. That's just kind of the reality. Like I'm in the music industry, a multi-billion dollar industry. It's about entertainment, art, and making money. And the money, funds all that. So for me, I just started looking at commercially successful records many years ago, studying them more in depth than pretty much any master engineer I know at this stage, to be honest. Like when I've talked to who were kind of mentor from afar and now peers, I just broke everything down into studying what does 50 hertz and below do on all these records and 50 to 100 and 100 to 200. And, here's the top 10 records and here's where the kick actually lives. Here's where the vocal lives. Here's where dynamic range is, here's where LUFS is, here's where RMS is, here's where true peak is, and how those four correlate heavily into the end product you get. And there are definite patterns within those four numbers when you're at final volume that definitely determine how well a song sounds, how big it sounds, how it's perceived, and how it's going to translate. I'm not really ready to share it on a podcast, but like I have the SAM meter workflow in Logic, which circles back to why do I work in Logic? Because of my workflow. I cannot create the system and the way I blend, parallel, and or almost mix at mastering the tracks together, and use my meter system that basically paints a picture without me really even needing to listen, which I never do. I love listening. That's why I got into this, because I love records.
Yeah.
But at this stage, I have it so dialed in, especially if I can look at a frequency chart or an analyzer with it, to pretty much I could tell you what a song sounds like and how compressed it is, and whether it's bass heavy or not, or how dense it is, by just looking at my meters and knowing how songs look, with 5 or 6 numbers, especially when I can look at the mix, and that's how I get to the finished product. It's as simple as every song starts at point A and we need to get to point B. Point B is the finished product that's coming out commercially to the world. So point A mix, this is going to be the most simple way you can think about mastering, and you'll have the exclusive of it, because I've probably never broken it down like this publicly yet.
Fantastic.
It's in my book I'm writing, actually.
Great. Cool.
That's coming out.
Usually we do the plugs at the end. Where can people find the book? Like you got a website or on your Instagram or what?
You'll know on my Instagram. Awesome. So it's called Finishing Records.
Love it. Great title.
Yeah. In it is the final chapter is how I master. And I've written it 1,000 different ways, but I simplified it to the mix starts at point A. We've got to get to point B, which is finished. People go, well, how do I know it's finished? Finish is the commercial market genre you're working in for 99% of people. It's Justin Bieber's song. It's Katy Perry. It's whoever you want it to be. So I measure mix A, and I look at DR, LUFS, True Peak, RMS, those things. You can read those numbers. And when I talk LUFS, really, I'm just doing momentary in the chorus on average, because that's usually the loudest part. And then you can measure, point B, your hit song you're chasing, which everybody's chasing a song usually.
Yeah.
Even if they're like, we don't have any references, I'll send it back. They're like, well, we actually wanted it to be like this.
Cool. Yeah, right.
Like, oh, cool.
Right.
That would have been
helpful. Yeah.
So I always do due diligence. I'm like, are you sure there's no references? And they're like, oh, yeah, well, we were jamming this 12-song playlist.
Yeah, right.
So it's like, great, thank you.
Yeah. I've got some big news, everybody. My vinyl record is out. We didn't make a ton of these, so these guys are going to sell out, and I would love for you to get your hands on one of them because they're so dope. And it comes with a whole bunch of like liner notes and pictures and special stuff, the things that really went into making this record. And I want you to get your hands on it. So go to scoobertdoober.pizza or check out my Instagram for a link, or click the link in the show notes or the bio or wherever you're watching this to pick up your copy. They're going to sell out. We really did not make very many of these, and I want you to have it. It's like a collector's item. So thank you for supporting my music, and I can't wait for you to hear it actually on physical vinyl. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
But anyway, you get a measurement of the final product. So now it's a matter of how do we go from A to B? And that's where, to me, the skill set of mastering comes in, and the actual technical side of, well, how does compression impact RMS? How does EQ impact all those things, RMS, LUFS, True Peak. And so there's a lot more that goes into it that I explain in the book, and we don't have time today. But essentially, I have honestly made mastering into a very simple process that if you can figure out where you start and where you need to end, which everybody pretty much does, and you kind of do the due diligence of measuring, and then you learn the skill set, which is the hard part, the 10,000 hours. To get you from A to B. It really makes a lot of sense to me. And it's not very complicated 14, 15 years into it. I say that it's not very complicated. I kind of approach mastering, and that's circling back to like the first question of, when a song comes in, a single, whatever, it's keeping all that in mind. Mm-hmm. So the first song that comes in from an artist, I make those measurements. Where's it at? DR, RMS, LUFS, True Peak, and I'll write that down in Logic. And then that becomes kind of like our starting point. And I'll have a conversation up front. Are there more singles? Do you think it's going to roll into an EP, a record? And usually they're like, oh yeah, that's our goal. We may not have the money, or we don't know what that looks like, but yes, almost every artist of course they want to keep making records.
For sure.
You know,
Totally.
why not?
Totally.
That's why they're doing it.
Right.
So, that becomes kind of like, for me, the context and boundaries or rules in which I know I need to stay within. So we get that first song through the door. It's usually very close to the reference they were chasing. And then I'll write that down. And then that becomes my point A and B. So anything else that comes in, I know, okay, I don't want to overshoot point B. So the next song that comes in, I'm not going to make even louder.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
or I'm not going to make it super bassy when the first one's not, unless there's very specifically, sometimes you will have artists, and this is kind of shifting, where they just don't care because we really do live in a playlist type of like industry. There's this kind of wrestling right now I see where people are making records again, where it's like top to bottom intentionality, meaning they want you to hit play and go through all 12 songs. But then there's also this rub of like, well, the consumer usually, we have a lot of data. They don't listen that way. They do playlists. They do curated playlists. They'll go on Spotify, and Spotify will say whatever, your mood, or here's your songs, and it's 30 random artists. And that's how we know usually new artists get discovered is via organic.
Has that affected the way that you think about mastering? Just especially if you look back across this 15-year career, that wasn't really the case 15 years ago.
Right.
It
correct.
very much is the case now. Has that changed any amount of just like the way that you think about it or listening to it in that like 12 song playlist, maybe of references?
Yeah, I mean it changes in that most people, whether they know what they're saying or not, at the end of the day, they want the song to be very competitive and loud. And whether that's good or bad. And when we say loud, we're just talking about compression. We're saying a song is more loud more often on average. That is essentially what compression is doing. It's lowering the peaks and it's raising the valleys to a more of a brick. That is compression. It's not really volume. It's actually, at the end of the day, compression and or limiting is making it quieter because it's lowering that peak. That what was loud up here is now down here. It's just we all use makeup gain or auto gain, so then it cranks it back up. So then we think it's louder, but what's really, it's just all more louder and more consistent.
Across.
All up here.
Across an average, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So technically it's actually quieter, but that's another day. And that's all fine. Like I make really compressed records all the time. That's what I grew up on listening. Didn't have a problem with it before I knew what that was. So it's not a problem now. I always honor the art. If they want dynamics and they know kind of what that means, we do that. If they want to blend, I know where that lands. If they want compression, I know where that lands. If they want loudness. So to answer your question, yes, I usually lean more compressed and loud because it's probably going to end up on a playlist that is also by usually other engineers or mixers that have already compressed it because people like the way that sounds. They like the energy. They like the consistency. It's what they grew up listening to, a lot like me. And so anything that's way far different often feels quote unquote wrong. It's not wrong, but for someone growing up who listened to lots of compressed records, and for a lot of time, like I listened to illegal downloads, just the worst encoding. So like distortion is just how I thought songs sounded.
Yes.
And then social media really reinforced that, especially TikTok. Because early on in TikTok, and I should measure this again, it's been a while, but TikTok would just auto gain your song when you would use it. So I genuinely have this theory where I think TikTok actually shaped the distorted hyper pop 808 sound because when people started uploading their songs that were not distorting in the bottom end, when TikTok started, you would play it back on TikTok and it would automatically just fuzz out because they added like a gain clipper to enhance it or something. And I genuinely think like that, this would have been like 6-7 years ago, there was a dramatic shift to where I think people were so unaware that songs can sound different from your social media to if you listen to it. If you have the original wave, it's not distorting. But on social media, it's distorting. So then they go, well, that's cool. So now I want my 808s to distort. So then they distort it in that. Then it go through TikTok again. So now you've got like distortion on distortion. And that really, I think, shaped where we are with like hyper pop and a lot of kind of the low end 808 distortion sounds that are in pop and rap. I genuinely have this like, it's conspiracy / I feel like proven theory that TikTok has shaped Sonically the record. So, I believe, most people have the best chance when we compress the record. So when I think about where they're going to be consuming records or the audience is probably going to be on Spotify. And it's always so funny because my clients, like 99% of them only talk about Spotify.
Mm.
Like not never, rarely Apple or YouTube, even though YouTube is like, this will be probably a misquote, but I thought I read somewhere like YouTube was actually the most consumed place for music, like in the
Mm.
world, because of internationally, it's easier to get YouTube than Spotify.
I understand that.
People are always concerned about Spotify, so I feel like I've become an expert in Spotify and
Yeah.
what it does,
Yeah.
in the coding process of normalization and how that interacts. And, they're always shifting things. So I'm always measuring things. I think that's all important. That's part of a mastering engineer's job
Yep.
is to know these things in order to bring peace of mind to the client that when their song comes out, it's going to still be intact and
Yeah.
represent as close as possible to what we were all hearing, and knowing what that algorithm is probably going to do to their song. And when I earn the trust and explain that to people, they're cool with it. And then it comes out and they're like, you were absolutely right. Like, sounds great. It's louder than most, which it technically isn't, but it's just, I know how to make songs pop out. And I want to say too, at the same time, I have plenty of big songs that are quiet. Like, it's important, but not important. And I always tell the client, like, the most important thing is are you stoked on the song? Like, because if you're not going to sell it. Like, you've got to be confident in the song. So that's always my number one goal is like, confidence over like sonic perfection.
Mm.
So in my gut, if I'm like, oh, it's a little muddy, but they're like, oh my gosh, it's exactly how I want it. This is the song. It's good. It sounds great everywhere in all my systems. Then I am stoked. And in my gut, I'm thinking, yeah, where it is, it's going to sound good pretty much everywhere. It's their art. I'm just the medium. I want them to be stoked on it. And, then they'll sell it. And then outside of that, it's, you got to have great marketing, great marketing, pushing the song always. I will always take like a great marketing plan and a decent song over, a great song with no marketing.
Interesting.
If you want,
I've seen a lot of people spend a lot of money on some pretty bad songs. I feel like there's at least a floor that you have to meet, like an entry fee of the song needs to be at least not necessarily like great in the like it could stand up against Hotel California or something. Like it's a classic song. It doesn't have to be like that. It can be goofy as hell.
Yeah,
but it has to have an it factor to the song.
Yeah, it has to have something sticky or marketable. I would almost be like, well, they probably then had bad marketing because a lot of money doesn't equal good marketing. We know that.
Yeah,
so you could drop $100,000 into a song and it go nowhere, but you spent it with a bad PR company. You put it all in a music video that wasn't important instead of doing 100 5-second TikToks. Like, to me, money doesn't always equivalent to good marketing. You could have great marketing with $1,000. That can go a long way, especially knowing social media is free, to create the content. So, but yeah, I mean, it's got to be something that the general public would be interested in. And that usually does. I mean, at the end of the day, there's something cool about it.
Yeah.
It's sonically, or there's a catchy lyric, or it's viral, or it's shocking. That's a lot of it.
Shocking. Right.
We moved into a lot of lyric shock.
I think those shock songs though are pretty ephemeral. It can launch somebody. It can turn them into a career. But 100%. Like somebody that like Lil Nas X, somebody might say is shock, but like those are good songs.
Oh,
produced in interesting ways, and like, you know what I mean?
I'm not saying shock is negative.
Yeah.
All of this is good.
Yes,
I'm not here to. It's not my art.
Yeah,
I'm just one little medium filter in which hopefully to bring peace of mind to tell you when your art comes out, it's going to sound good everywhere.
Love that.
That's my only goal.
Yes.
Whether you want to say, I mean, there are times where I've drawn the line where, for me, I'm like, it's a racist.
Right.
And in my gut, or a sexist thing where I'm like, I can't. Like, I'm not going to do that. So I don't even comment though. Like, I just say, it's not a good fit.
Yeah.
Find someone else. I leave it at that. I have a mantra in my life that has taken me very far in all of life, but mastering, which is like, engage or manage. So I filter everything through engage or manage. Do I want to engage in this, which means like heavy investment, reconnaissance, question, or do I just need to manage this? Meaning like it's a top view. I'm not emotionally invested. I'm not judging. And 99% of the time, everything is managed. Like rarely do you need to engage and bring in your in my opinion, my personal beliefs at the end of the day, 99.9% of the time do not play a factor until something comes across the desk, which is only like 3 or 4 times in 14 years.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I can't touch that. Like, it is so far offensive or insensitive that I can't support that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably still art to somebody,
Mm-hmm.
but at this stage, like 0.0000001%,
Right.
of what's come across my desk. Most what comes across my desk is awesome, and the people are awesome. There's nothing cooler than music, than art, because these songs don't exist, and then they appear like out of the abyss. People pull them out of the ether or from the Lord or the universe or wherever they believe it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
That they're pulling things that didn't exist. Then we, tangibly put music to it, instrumentation, and then I get to be a part of that. And then it's like, as far as I know, it's just always there forever. It's eternal. And to play a part in that, whether it's a brand new artist or a bigger artist now, like every song to me is so, so, so special that I get to participate in that creation process and know that forever. And even now I have 2 kids, like they'll get to know like these are the records dad worked on,
Yes.
and like that is very special. And I think it's important to participate in things like that in the creation process. I think gives a lot of fulfillment to me and others. And that's why I still get stoked like 14 years into this.
Yeah.
A lot of people ask like, what are you so excited to work on? And I'm like, anything.
Dude, that's one of the things I'm most jealous about for a mastering engineer such as yourself. You're able to work on so much music. You have like the absolute best perch imaginable.
It's kind of crazy because I love finishing things. So like I can see it now. Like when I was a kid, I loved like checklists, and like school is just like I would beg the teachers, can you give me the syllabus for the whole year? Like just let me just plow through that.
Yeah.
Most of them wouldn't. Like you need to, go through. I'm like, no, just give me every book, every project, like, and in 6 weeks I'll be done. Like, let me just be done.
Yeah.
And when I got to college, teachers were more like, here's the year syllabus.
For sure.
And I'd be like, sweet, see you in 2 months. Like the whole year is going to be done outside of tests and some like group projects that I can't do on my own.
Mm-hmm.
But, when I got into mastering, I was like, it's probably a dopamine hit on some level for sure of like, oh, I get to be at the end and finish a record every day. And it's like it's something new. It's a new team every day.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, like I've built up consistent clients and labels. So there's similar teams, but the personnel behind it changes. New producer, new writer, new artist, new songwriter. And for me, it's like never boring. There's never a dull day in mastering. Like it's always shifting.
Cool.
It's always, I feel like I've always got to be doing due diligence of studying the records that are out. And one of the biggest joys as I've done this longer, because I'm like an old fart now, it feels like, because I turned 37, which is young, but I'm old in music years, especially for artists a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many clients I have that were like, 10 years old when I started. They didn't exist. Like I tell people that all the time within my business. Like you get really concerned, it's important to build a client list and artists and blah, blah. But like at some point 7 years ago, I went through this transition where like a lot of my clients just quit. They had made their 3 records. They were 37.
Yeah.
It worked as far as they wanted to. They had kids and they're done. And then I was like, oh, wait a second. I see this kind of like ripple and even studios shutting down, not even because they went out of business, just when I met the guys, they were 50 and now they're 62 and they're retiring.
Yeah.
So they that's a whole book gone of business. So now a lot of my clients, like I didn't know them 5 years ago and they weren't even making records. Like some of the young Belmont students that I love working with, they're 18, like that's great. Like I could almost be their parent.
Yeah.
Like, I am 19 years older than them, which is crazy to say out loud.
Yes.
But like these they're adults, young adults. I hate calling them kids because they're not. They're smart and smarter than I was. It keeps me young on some level, but keeps me having to do due diligence. And they're always sending me references. This is what's fun.
The best. Yes.
I'm like, who's that?
Yeah.
Who's the, when I talk about hyperpop, I'm like so deep in hyperpop.
Yeah, totally.
That's kind of relatively new and it's gained speed and then it's kind of bled into all the genres. But, I discovered a lot of that 6-7 years ago via TikTok, via some young clients that I got connected with and forever grateful because it's always just like, oh, wow, I didn't know that was possible. I've never thought about. And they're doing it on accident, pushing into digital clipping or whatever plug, there's no rules ever really. I mean, there's the techniques that seem to yield a certain end product. So that's kind of good to know. But then out of that, it's like, go create.
Yeah. Well, and luckily those techniques that yield that end product are fairly flexible. Like you can
Yes, they
incorporate
are.
a digitally clipped 808
Yes,
and then
yes.
like have a really crisp vocal too. And it's like, hey,
100%.
this sounds like top 40. Like before it might
Absolutely,
not
you're
have.
right.
And that's how like I've been watching the hyperpop where it
Yes.
almost is less of a genre now and just is part of pop. Like it just
Yes.
like the beast swallowed it.
I mean, I love what I
Absolutely,
do. I still love what I do. Talking about mastering, I just adore it. Like I wake up every day just so dang grateful to have work, to have anything come across the desk. And I've been doing this long enough now too, where some of the bigger artists, or some things that have won awards, like I started with those artists when they were zero.
Yeah.
Like they
Cool.
were that came across the desk, no following, no first song. And they do a song and then they do 3 and then we do an EP and they're getting, and now a label's interested, now distribution. And then 6 years later, the record's gold, the record's platinum, blah, blah, or they're nominated and now they're writing and co-writing. So now their circle, and we've kind of all done this
Yes.
together in the mixers. We've all done this. That's why I get excited about anything that comes across. It's almost like a lottery ticket. Every day I like work on something like, ooh, I just bought another ticket. Like you just never know.
Right.
There's some songs that, got real big that I'm like, I would never pin that to be that way. Not in a negative way. Just like it is so unpredictable for the most part of what will pop off. And that to me is kind of fun. I think for artists that frustrates the heck out of them.
Yeah, right.
And I try to help my clients. I think that's why my clients come back. They know I'm playful, like I'm curious about the process. I'm always learning. I'm always engaging. I'm always like, yeah, let's think about that. Let's try that. Let's dial that in. I always tell my clients, like the no leads to the yes. That's my other mantra of like, if you want to run a V3 with more bass, we're doing it. And if you go back and go, no, V2 was it or V1 was it, sometimes I had it today. My client was like, oh, I'm sorry for being such a pain in the butt. I want V1 and we ran V3, I said, no. To know that we went down those routes, and I tell everybody like V1, when I send it back, like I'd be so proud for it to come out. I will not send something back that I am unsure on, because to me, like if you are guessing, you're not mastering. Like I really believe that, and that kind of confuses people. Sometimes like, well, how do I start then? And it's like, well, start studying records, like start doing the work, so you're not guessing. How do you not guess on any other thing in life? You do the work, you start putting in the reps, you talk to people, you learn, you fail. If we do like a V3 and we circle back to V1, like with a client today, she said, I'm such a pain in the butt, I'm so sorry. No, absolutely not. Like, this is the fun part. That's the other thing. I'm always like, we're at like 98%. Like, I get to be a part of this fun 2%, or sometimes it's like 15%, but most time it's like we're pushing it a little bit.
Yeah.
And, I always tell the client, like, this is the fun taste. This is, in food, I love cooking. Like, what type of salt are we using? Is it tasting salt? Is it coarse salt? Is it sea salt? Because it all pushes it a different direction, your experience and taste. And that's to me a bit of like, I deliver V1 that I'm stoked on. I feel like it is showing off what the mix is doing well. I feel like it translates and competes. And then from there, we're tasting.
Yes.
Sometimes like, what if it's a little more spicy? I'm like, great. And they're like, oh, it's way spicy. You blew out my palate. Like, step back, or actually I don't want this song to be spicy. We'll go back to. So anyway, that's where my brain goes. There's a high correlation of food and
it's good
music for me.
I see the through lines. Sorry to interrupt this very important broadcast, but it's time for one more advertisement for myself for this podcast. What I'm asking for is for you to rate it 5 stars, share it with your friends. This is like the most important thing for this podcast to grow. So if you want to do this, you go onto the podcast screen, right? You click on the ... on Spotify. Under there, it says rate show, and you go and you click it 5 stars. If you could do that for me, that's the best way for the algorithms, all this stuff, to share it out with the world. I know that it's a lot to ask, but if you could please just hit those 3 dots and then a 5 star, it would really help us out and helps us, get the word out and spread the love of music. So thank you. If you're listening on YouTube, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you so much. And here's the rest of the episode. So you can't dangle out the carrot of studying Spotify without me picking that up at some point. I'm really curious about, you don't have to give any secrets or anything necessarily, but the mindset, the methodology, like how do you go about saying, okay, just like probably somebody who's writing for chamber music went into the chambers and listened to their music, was like, okay, this is what I probably should do for my next composition or whatever. The analogous thing, how do you go about it what have you been? What is it's like differentiated?
Shout out in theory to Isotope. Like RX11 came out with Stream Preview, and I was part of that beta testing and giving ideas to that. And I brought a large body of work and education to that testing of saying like, hey, and Bill, we had him on my old podcast. He was a big fan of kind of the work I was doing and whatnot. And I love Bill. He's awesome. And he helps develop amazing tools and then brought me on for beta. And this latest Stream Preview, I brought a lot of my, 14 years of observations, because I
Yes.
really grew up on a Spotify. Most of my music's on Spotify, not on CD, like or vinyl. So
Yeah,
digital
right.
is really my expertise on some level. I just brought to the table to them, like when I measure this song on a playlist, it's measuring this, but on the artist page, it measures this. And on the single release, it measures this. It is not linear. Normalization is not linear. And then when you get into third party apps that don't even have normalization, you throw in a curveball. So that's like TV, web apps, Sonos. There's so many third party apps that don't even do normalization. So that really should make you, at the end of the day, go, I'm going to run this song essentially as hot to zero as I feel comfortable doing, which is usually to zero. And then I'm going to compress it so it's more loud more often. So when it is on all those very public devices like restaurants, grocery stores, Sonos, it doesn't use normalization. So like if you are subscribing to kind of a lot of the noise that has been on the internet about master it to this level and this, or even if you, unfortunately, if you follow Spotify's guidelines, because they'll say like, we play back negative 14 FS, try to do that and try to not overdo negative 2 dB true peak. If you turn in songs that way at that level and don't let them normalize it down to that level, so, your song's gonna be like probably anywhere from 8 to 10 dB lower, you
Whoa.
know, playback
Jeez. Yeah.
instantly if you were to follow any of the loud voices on the internet.
Yeah.
Like
Right into the
60%. Yeah.
background of that
Yeah.
restaurant. You
Yeah.
don't exist anymore.
And unfortunately that happened. And there was a lot of fear around those sorts of marketing, type of things, people selling plugins and ideas. But I feel like sometimes, honestly, Spotify doesn't even understand its own normalization, and what it's doing and, how it impacts songs. But, with RX11 Stream Preview, the long story short of that is I was observing all these things and told them, and they kind of implemented that. And then Dale Becker was doing some similar work with that, and I had reached out to him, and we kind of all connected the dots to each other and connected each other. There's something happening here that's non-linear. I'm observing. So I say all that because I noticed that was happening. So your song could be in a playlist one spot and sound louder than the others, and then the next playlist sound quieter than the surrounding songs, or on the artist page versus single page. So that kind of impacts just a framework for clients. So sometimes clients will say, hey, on this playlist I'm on, my song sounds quieter than these or louder than this if they're really studying. I always kind of know, like, let's validate that concern. Yes, you want your song to be loud and competitive. Like, I get it. If I had that happen to me, I'd kind of be like, what the heck happened here? But at the end of the day, I know like it's within like one LUFS.
Yeah.
Like the normalization is really good at the end of the day. It really is pretty accurate. And then I also know that they are in their own echo chamber of songs or the playlist that's they've created. And then when they say, well, it's louder than this song or quieter than this song, I also know they're not actually A-Bing in a
Yeah.
list. They're
Yeah.
hitting play, stopping, going to the next chorus of that song, hitting play, stopping, then going to theirs, hitting play, moving it to 232. And that's such an inaccurate way to really go, is it louder? And then usually it comes down to something specific. Well, the vocal is louder. Or the
Yes.
drums hit
Right.
harder. So then it's a reframe
Or
of,
different arrangement or something
yeah,
like
different
that.
arrangement.
Yeah.
Or like I could then go, early on I would help educate a bit more. And now I have a template in my email that really explains it well.
Cool.
It still gets asked, once a month. I could go to the song. They're like, well, this song, Lil Nas X, louder here, and compared to my song. And then I could go through that Lil Nas X song and be like, but your song is actually louder here than his song.
Cool. Yeah.
So we can't,
Mhm.
that's almost always how it is.
Mhm.
They are hyper focused, echo chambered to themselves, and it's valid because they want it to compete, which is what I want. I want to compete. So I always help them reframe. Well, it is competing. For these 30 seconds, you're beating Lil Nas X as far as loudness. Are you unwilling to acknowledge that? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I never thought about it,
Hmm.
And then I reframe too, like I've said before, we have a history of songs that range in such a wide, almost like an 8 dB of dynamic range for the last 15 years of hit songs. They're drastically different in
Yes.
final level and compression. And so I say all that to kind of give context to how I view Spotify. And with Spotify, there is a diminishing return to how loud you make something or how bright you make something or how dynamic you make something and what you will gain off their final peak output. And this is all in the context of you have normalization on in the normal default setting. So if you move it to loud or soft, that all of this data gets shifted and it's
Okay.
really weird then.
Yeah.
But I think the data is something like 80 some percent.
Don't touch it.
Yeah, don't
Yeah.
it's default normalization, normal
Yeah.
playback, blah blah blah.
Yep.
So that's what I always default to. What are most people doing
Yes.
in the
Naturally.
industry I am in? That's where I want to put all my energy. I don't want
Yeah.
to
Right.
I'm not interested in spending 90% of my energy on the fringe one person who listens on the super loud and they're messing with the EQ curve. Like
Yeah.
that's just not my concern at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yep.
So, that's the context of this. Normalization, normal. So it's playing back at negative 14 LFS in theory. And then with a dynamic range, so almost all of us are uploading songs that are way beyond that LUFS. So like a lot of pop stuff is like -7, -6 LUFS, and usually the dynamic range coincides or correlates very closely to that. And the RMS will be, which is total voltage of a song, root mean squared. RMS is really impacted by low end, LUFS really impacted by top end, dynamic range is really impacted by mid range. And so between those three, you can see a ratio usually of how a song will sound without even
Mm.
hearing it if you study records. I'm giving away all the sauce here. But anyway, knowing that, then I could study records and I'm not going to give away all the sauce.
Yeah.
But you can see patterns and things. And when you hear a song that's extra loud, you can measure it and be like, oh, they have this relationship. See, when I measure, you need to measure with normalization off. So you
Okay.
actually get the full volume.
Yes. Right.
Now, for anyone out there who's going to be frustrated with me, I know that Spotify's encoding adds some gain to it.
Yeah.
So like it's going from your wave to basically an MP3. In that encoding process, it's adding gain, basically oversample, it's clipping. And so what I'm measuring in theory isn't still the true waveform,
Yes.
but it's pretty darn close. And I'm
Yes.
okay with that. Once again,
Mhm.
I'm okay with that.
Right.
It's very close. It's not perfect. So through that, you measure it with normalization off, then you can really see what a song is doing. You can see where their compression was within the dynamic range. You can see the RMS level. You can see the LUFS, and then you can see true peak. Most commercial songs, including mine, are true peaking over 0. That's because the encoding process, we're not following Spotify's recommendation
Mhm.
because most people like distortion at the end of the day. And so even on Spotify's FAQ, I think it's the section called like my song's not as loud as others or something. It's literally like the section. You
It's
can
probably
go
one of
look
the
it up.
most clicked
Yeah.
sections.
And it's always changing. Like I've been reading the FAQ in Spotify for like 10 years.
Sweet.
And like every 6 months they change a little bit. A little language, a little thing, a little word. And now they do say if you're basically running your song up to basically 0, you're not following our true peak, you're going to have distortion. Distortion does impact how we perceive loudness and the overall energy.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
a song that can read the same almost on RMS, DR, and LUFS, but one true peak's at say like +1, because it's not doing any true peak. But then you have the same song with true peak on, meaning it's basically limiting the limit. It's basically limiting the samples that are going over. It's going to sound quieter by almost a dB.
Mm.
Same song, just true peak on, true peak off, because the other one's not only is flying over 0, but now it's distorting, which is adding even more energy, perceived loudness, than the other one that might sound a hair dull in comparison. So I take all that within Spotify. I say all that because the diminishing return is really, I messed around with this a lot of uploading songs that I'm never going to tell what they are because they're all pulled already. But experimenting, same song at different levels, outputs, ranges, dynamic
Cool.
range, LUFS.
And
if
actually
you
uploading it to Spotify to
yeah,
be able to get
under
the
an
output.
artist name that nobody knows about, but like 2 people,
Sweet.
and just measuring. I've done it
Yeah.
for years and years.
Yeah. Jeez.
And what I found is the big conclusion is it's not a sexy answer. If you try to play the system and game it and try to make a really dynamic song or really push the top end in hopes of perceived loudness, if you get outside of like a few dB range of competitive, you do not see any benefit. Your song is just quiet. Like I wish it. I don't even wish. That's just how it is. So a
Yeah.
lot of times people are like, "Oh, make it more dynamic. It's going to be louder." Yes, it is louder. It is true. It is peaking with normalization on louder, but those peaks are only like 5% of the total song. So it's a snare hit in the chorus.
Yeah.
But then 95% of the other time, that song is quieter than the brick. Say you have a scale between 0 and 10. This is just Sam's fake numbers. 0 and 10 units. And I have a really compressed song that on average is at 7. It's just at 7. Like pretty much 7 the whole time. Yeah. 6 to 7, 6 to 7. And then I have a really dynamic song that now can take advantage essentially of Spotify's normalization output. So say that song goes to 9, but in the verses it's a 5. So it's lower in theory than the other song most of the time. So you've got like 2 songs running. Let's see this video. The same race. Oh, well, let's say this is the loud one. It starts louder. Intro. First one.
Intro
louder.
chorus. Yeah, why not?
Here we go. We're just doing this. And chorus hits. Oh, boom. But then it does that.
Yeah.
So they're doing this,
Yeah.
And it's most of the time lower, where this one's not moving really. It's doing this. Beep, 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 beep. And this one's under here. And then it goes like that. So a lot of those people on the internet go, well, look at this. Look at this. It's 4 dB louder. Look at this. Your song is down here. Look at this. And it's like, you're correct. 100% true. Can't deny it. But then go 5 seconds later. Look at this.
Yes.
Look at that,
Right.
And that's what's happening. That's the confusion of all that loudness and normalization and what's happening. And more dynamic songs are louder. And it's like sometimes yes, but most of the time no. I say all that within the normalization for people listening is you can learn a lot by just doing ARC's 11 stream preview. That is like so many people's research beyond me in a nutshell. Like it's worth the money just to then study records because you can upload your wave in there. It'll spit it out in Spotify's normal playback and you can then measure. You can even play that out of ARC's 11 right next to Spotify and see how it's going to compete against X, Y, and Z song in theory. But the problem is if you go from playing that song on Spotify from playlist to album mode to single, it's going to do that a bit.
That's bizarre.
I say what I want to really wrap that up into is at the end of the day, none of it really matters. I went down the weeds, the rabbit hole, found the other hole of the rabbit, and I just kept going down. And even in this RX thing, like it's important, but I really summarize it as like, I found like, wow, normalization is pretty great.
Yeah.
It's doing a really good job. And it seems to get a little bit better with the way it does it between songs and playlists and whatever. And I'm asking them to do an insane thing, like the infinite variables normalization has to calculate.
Right.
Of sourcing. The fact that it does get it within like 1 most of the time is bonkers.
Yeah.
And then I always tell people the consumer doesn't care for the most part.
Yeah.
Your music is background music.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't say it in a negative way, but like my wife is a perfect consumer. She plays it on headphones and then stops and looks at a social media video. Then it's in the car and then it's on a JBL Bluetooth speaker.
Yeah. Right.
Someone calls her or texts her, pause the song. I've never met a consumer who goes, well, I listen to the chorus of this song and the chorus of this song and that one's louder.
Right. Yeah. Right.
That's never been. Yeah. And there could be a subconscious thing of like,
that chorus really hit. Yeah.
Yeah, it really hit. So that's why they love it. And I'd be like, there's probably validity to that.
Yes.
I'm not an idiot, but we get stuck so often in mastering, mixing artists in this echo chamber of our side of the world. And we all want, for the most part, to be consumed by the consumer.
Yeah, right.
Who's going to pay?
Yep. In the best possible
the merch,
way.
The tour, the subscription, the Patreon. And so we need to blend, but I always try to tell people now, especially the more label work I do and seeing how focused they are on consumer. And that's Spotify is all about consumer. How do I keep you on the platform longest? Your focus should be heavily if you want to make money in this industry. And whether this is good or bad, I don't know, or disrespectful to art or the nature of art, that's how it works currently. And if you don't want to participate in that, that's fine. But you have to accept the reality that you are going against a very uphill, like it's rough if you don't want to try and participate in that game. I want people to make records how they want to make it. go study records. I'll use Audio Hijack. I don't get paid by them at all. Maybe if they listen. But I use Audio Hijack for all my measuring because I can load all my plugins and routing to my meters. And you can play back Spotify and run your meters on it. But measure songs and learn where the hit records actually land.
Yes.
Because even when I talk to other master engineers, they might be like, oh, that song sounds so loud. And I'm like, yeah, it's a -5 DR. They're like, what's DR? I'm like, you don't know what dynamic range is? Like, you mean love?
Yes. We always have one final question that I have to ask all of my guests. So this show is called Love Music More. And this is the final question that I'd like to ask you. Why do you love music?
I love music because of the community and the creation process, as I described earlier. Like, that is what I like it. There is nothing more for me in my life and experience like spiritual, divine, communal, life-giving than participating in something that didn't exist in theory, or maybe it existed somewhere and someone grabbed it.
Yes.
Seeing that come into tangible and then seeing that impact lives, turn the frown upside down, with it's the power of music, as cheesy as that is. But that's why I love it. That is why I love it, why I still get passionate about it, because there's so much power in it to impact people, especially stuff I work on. I feel like will be around forever. It's on hard drives, it's on networks, it's on DSPs, of like the work I've worked on is eternal. And maybe a bajillion years from now, none of it exists. We're all gone. But for the foreseeable 1,000 years, we'll probably, like, the work I've worked on will probably be around. And I think that's really cool. And the final thing I'll say about it is, for me, as I get older, like, every song and record is a timestamp. And it's really special to me to be able to look back. And with most people, you can attach a moment or an emotion. And as I get older, I get nostalgic. I'm like, oh man, that was that first label record, or that was that one time that did something, or that was that one artist that sent me cookies or something. Like, that is the power of music. It's like the power in the song, and then it has this giant ripple effect into your life forever. And being able to participate that in every day and get paid for it is crazy. People pay me. So thank you, people out there. I love you. As cheesy as it is, I posted a while ago, like, you pay for, like, my children, and I'm forever grateful for that. Like, you keep the tubes warm, you keep the fridge full, and I do not take that lightly. That is a massive responsibility when someone gives me their hard-earned money to help them cross the finish line with a record. It is always special. It always gets 110%. And there's no greater joy for me, pretty much, than to participate in that. And that is why I love music. Okay.
Well put, Sam. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Of course.
Where can people find you?
The best place to find me is on Instagram, Moses Mastering. You will find me. I am there. That's where I'm most active. I post 5 times a week usually. I respond to my DMs, but just go there. And then usually people that know me, I just talk. So we'll email or whatever. Just, I'm a talker, so as if you can't.
It was great. We're all the beneficiaries. Well, thank you so much, Sam.
Of course.
Until next time, my friend.
Thank you. It's been a gift.